Okay, so a little bit of a review, going back 2 weeks. So what we were covering wasn't the argument of God's existence based on human experience. We outlined how the other two proofs of the existence of God are very cerebral. They're more technical and misses two very important parts of who we are. We're not just minds, but we're a body and we're emotions, we're hearts. And in order to develop an appreciation that God exists, well, it's got to be something that actually touches us on every level. So in the argument of experience, I was covering three different aspects of that. Just pragmatism, brass tacks, does Judaism function? Does it work? Does it actually work? Does it do something? The next was the history of the nation. What's the story of the Jewish people? And the last is personal meaning. We're going to open that one up a lot more today. So as far as the pragmatic view goes, we talked about how religion is both creates stability and enables trust between people. I kind of gave this idea of like looking at life as really two different types of places you might be in every experience. I call it the known world and the unknown world. And what Judaism does is, well, the unexpected things of life, well, they naturally are frightening and they naturally are overwhelming. And what ends up happening is when we're in the unknown, well, our brains shut down. We go into fight or flight, even on a very subtle level. I mean, something as small as just living in the city. People are just that much more stressed out and anxious because there's all these freakishly loud noises every 10 minutes. It's the bus driving down the street. And we're not running in terror from it, obviously. I mean, we're not living in fear. But on a biological level, it does affect us and does limit our ability to engage in the world in a more calm, thought-out way. So what halacha specifically does, and I think we're going to get into this a little more today, is halacha kind of outlines the value of life or meaning of life, let's say, and gives us a roadmap to travel down. So even if we might find ourselves in the craziest situations, we have a map of life that we can go to kind of show us the way. So no matter how much we're in unknown territory, we always have this map to carry with us to help us be more calm, to help us be more in our lived experience, and to be able to make free will choices as opposed to merely responding out of fear or out of anger. So that was stability. Religion also enables trust. That it's what binds people together on a fundamental level. I mean, to say it's personal is an understatement. That when we're able to trust one another, well, just life is just way better. I mean, we're really as simple as that. And what research has found is that people who are living a more religious life and living the values that they find meaningful, well, things like anxiety and depression plummet. Having more stable marriages, longer lasting marriages is more likely. Doing better academically, suicide rates plummet. There's all these different benefits of just living a religious life. And a big part of that is that religion enables us to be together in a meaningful way. Helps us trust one another. So that was the pragmatic aspect of things. What we also covered 2 weeks ago was the history of the Jewish people as being another way of looking at this argument from experience. We're survivors. That within all of Jewish history, it's been one extermination attempt after another that we've survived. We're the only ancient people that exists today. And that's saying a lot. I also kind of opened up a little door with something that Carl Jung, he was a famous psychoanalyst. He was one of the first therapists that was running around. And what he observed about the Jewish people was that we were making the unconscious conscious, and that because of just how old we are as a people, that through this process of trying to spell out in very black and white ways, in very detailed ways, what is valuable and what is meaningful. What the Jewish people have been doing for thousands of years has been taking the infinite and the undefinable aspects of life and making them explicit, making them easy for people to understand. And that's the halacha process. That we've been revealing more and more and trying to clarify more and more, well, what are our obligations in this world? It's worth noting that morality is not a subjective matter, which is really important to know nowadays just because of how popular, especially in American universities, postmodernist thinking is. I mean, if you guys have gone to a university, even now in high schools, it's becoming a part of the curriculum, that the idea that there are infinite ways of interpreting the world. And so, in Jewish terms, mehechi tesi, how can you justify your position? Because there's an infinite amount of positions, everything's subjective. So there's one problem with the postmodernist view of things is, well, it's actually just not true. I mean, it's not just a lie, but it's exactly the opposite of what they say. And they have a little bit of kernel of truth to what they're arguing because, well, say take literary criticism. I mean, you can kind of come up with and just life in general is complex. You can come up with a lot of different interpretations of life. So that's true. When you're confronted with so much complexity, well, that just naturally occurs. But what they overlook is that we're not books, or we're not just alive, but we're actually trying to survive. We're actually trying to get along in life in a more or less effective way. And so what that means is there's only so many things that will allow you to continue playing the game of life. There's a lot of ways to stop playing that game. And so it's almost like a good way of thinking of it is that there's almost like a proto-morality built in to really just advanced animal biology. If you guys have heard of Franz de Waal, he's a really cool researcher. What he and Jane Goodall, what they did is their area of research is animal psychology. So what these guys did, they went out and they studied chimpanzees, and a lot of their work is really trying to demonstrate how moral thinking, fairness, is built into life. You can't escape that. This idea of fair is so basic. Another researcher, his name is Panksepp, he was the guy who discovered the play circuit in mammals. We all like to play. And we all like to play fair, even rats. That was his research. And when rats get together and they like to wrestle, just like dogs like to wrestle, people like to wrestle, we all like to wrestle. We like playing around with each other. And what he found was that rats play fair because, well, obviously the bigger rat is always going to win. He's bigger and easy enough. But if he wasn't fair to the smaller opponents he had, well, what would happen is the smaller rats would simply stop playing with him. It's not fair. No one wants to play with him. And so they found it was something like 30% of the time, 40% of the time, the bigger rats would have to play fair to keep the smaller rats playing. That's the basis of all morality, is this idea of trying to be fair to other people, keeping them in the game of life with you. And when you don't do that, well, you just die. So the postmodernists are quite wrong. It's like, well, yes, you can interpret the world in an infinite amount of ways, but there's only so many ways that you can actually get on in life and continue playing the game of life. And getting back to Franz de Waal, something that he found was that whether it be chimpanzees or lesser mammals or especially people, is that we don't organize our groups around power or beating people up. We organize it around being fair, being compassionate. And as soon as say, you have these monkey troops, and when you have, the big bad monkey, takes power and he's terrorizing everybody. Well, he might get along for a little while. What ends up happening is everyone else gangs up on him and tears him apart. It was like 2 years ago they had this happen in the Jerusalem Zoo. One day the zookeepers came in. They had just gotten this really rowdy alpha male in the monkey pen, and he was raising hell, for the past about half year. And they show up one morning, and his entire body was strewn across the exhibit.
Yeah.
Two of the smaller males got together and said, "Enough is enough. You can't treat people like this." They tore him apart, limb from limb, because he wasn't playing fair. He wasn't grooming other people. He wasn't sharing his food. He wasn't being nice to the little babies. And that's what he got. So this whole idea of survival. Yeah, that's what he gets. You're exactly right. This whole idea of survival of the fittest, it's a fallacy. Because we hate it when people live that way. We want people to play fair. And I think this is why people are so obsessed with sports. You guys like sports? Mm-hmm. It's like, you get these guys, especially guys like with baseball, that they're tracking the statistics for, 30 years straight. Someone has the Yankee statistics memorized up here. And it's like, well, why are you so interested in sports? Well, because playing every game, playing sports is all about playing fair. No one cares that Babe Ruth made that famous home run where he pointed and he hit the thing. What people care about is the whole story of Babe Ruth's career, including that very dramatic home run that he made. But it's a person who was able to always play fair, was always able to show sportsmanship and the highest degree of discipline in treating people nicely as he struggled with them in the baseball game. Well, that's what makes following baseball awesome. It's not a single game or a single hit, but it's the whole life of the story. And we're obsessed with games. It's like people pay hundreds of dollars to go to baseball games. And it's like, well, do they get to hit the ball? I mean, do they get to throw the ball? It's like, no, I'm sorry. You're paying $200 only to watch. All right, that's what you get to do. You don't get to play the game. You only get to watch. And we'll still do that because it's in our bones to play fair. It's in our bones to be moral people. We don't get to choose that. That's what I have to say about the postmodernists. They need to watch more baseball. Okay. We talked about national revelation being this other aspect of this argument of experience that God exists. That I presented this idea that, we're not into missionizing. So this idea that, again, this national revelation we all experience is it's a tight argument. It's a very compelling argument. You can spend a lot of time defending it, showing its uniqueness. But it was never used as a tool to convince people to be religious. It was more a part of our story as a people. It happened to be that every single man, woman, and child saw God speak, and that's our story. And we're not using it to sell the religion. In fact, we don't want to sell our religion. We turn converts away. It's a pain in the neck to be a convert. You're struggling to get into Beis Din, and the rabbis are constantly telling you, take a hike. This isn't for you. You don't need it. You'll have a chelik and olam haba anyway. Don't sweat it. We're really not into missionizing. So I kind of presented this idea as we innocently have one of the more airtight proofs for the existence of God. And when I was in university, I think I mentioned this to a couple of you, that I was a world religions major. And so, we were going through, it was a full year of proofs for the existence of God. And, we had all sorts of different characters in this class. And it was a cool, I love the group there. It was a really great experience with these guys. But there was one lady, she was she was 60 years old. She was a businesswoman, and she was just doing this as continued education. She was just an interest of hers. And as we were going through this proof of national revelation of everybody experiencing God speaking, she kind of turns to me and she says she really hated the proof compared to all the other ones. And I was kind of taken aback. She was too into not liking this proof, And so I asked her, well, what bothered you about it? And she said, well, it just makes too much sense. You're not having to play the mind games of, like the ontological argument, God is the first cause, or, we don't have to play the game of everything has a design. It's just, well, we all just saw God talk, and That's just how we roll. Like I woke up, I had breakfast, and God talked to me. It's a hard one to argue against in many respects. So that was that idea I tried to present. And the last unique sort of characteristic of Judaism is we're constantly trying to make rabbis obsolete. That what we really want to try and do is educate everybody to the best possible standard that they can reach, so they can live their own life and make the judgment calls they need to make, as opposed to having to be under the thumb of someone else. And that's a large project, and obviously you have to have teachers, and there are rabbis that, because we're not born knowing everything, but that's the real goal, is to enable people to use their free will, as opposed to just listening to what other people have to say. Okay. So, mouse. Yeah, that's cute. So what we're going to move into today is, what do you need to have worked out about yourself to really cash in to halacha and this whole system? Because Judaism is a map of meaning. That's what halacha is. It's a map of meaning. That's the best way of thinking about it. And it provides us with the answers of how things are meaningful. But it doesn't actually tell us the steps in which to achieve the moral suggestions it's making. So it actually creates a bigger problem. What I kind of mean by that, is like, it's almost as though like you're given the directive, keep Shabbos. That's the answer. Well, great, do it. Well, how? That's not spelled out. So it's only that we're given the answers of what is valuable, Shabbos. But what ultimately has the meat in that value is learning how to live Shabbos. And that's a good way of thinking about it. How do you, as an individual, a unique person, actually achieve the goal? So halacha is not so much a do this, do that sort of thing, but rather it's like painting a target. Well, this is where you need to get. Good luck on your journey. How are you going to get there? Well, that's kind of up to you. You're going to have to work that one out. And that's the heart of what a derabanan is. Basically what the rabbis did was, whenever they made a derabanan, is they got together and said, well, this is what we observe human nature as being. And so they created that. What a derabanan does is, that actually is the roadmap to get to Shabbos. How do you keep Shabbos? Well, okay, they took into account how people are on a real life sort of level. Said, well, okay, in order to be able to keep Shabbos, you'd have to do X, Y, and Z to accomplish that. Good, you're one step closer to actually achieving that goal. But you're really supposed to do that on your own, because that's just not enough. It's almost like that's the general guidelines for everybody, but we're not the same. We're all unique people, and we have to almost create our own derabanans to be able to walk that path. Another way of thinking about it is, these list of laws. They're straightforward. It's easy to read off. But it's like, the more you read it off, like, well, why does anybody get a headache when they're reading a legal book? It's like, the more that you see, the more goals that you see, it's like, well, how do I achieve them all? Like, at a certain point, if all you're focusing on is the end you have to reach, and less thought is put into, well, how do I develop that? Well, it just becomes a judge to your life. You have to practically come up with very specific strategies that match your life to achieve those goals. Otherwise, all you're doing when you learn halacha is you're creating a judge that is saying your life is a failure. And like, who likes that? No one. So as a part, it's almost like it's counterintuitive. It's like the more that you focus on the how do I achieve, all these different halachas, and focus more on that growth, as opposed to how long the list is. Well, that's how you actually are able to cash in on halacha. You got to know the rules of the game. The three things you need to know when you play a game. Halacha is a game. Morality is a game. You have to know the type of game being played. You have to know who you are. And you have to know the rules. And when you got those three down, you're going to be able to play the game of halacha pretty well. And it's not going to be this judge and terror that it is for a lot of people. So what type of games are on the table here? What are our options? Monopoly.
Life.
There's yeah, right, the game of life. There's two ways of defining what the world is. It can either be a place of things, or it can be a forum for action. And science is the first. What are things made of? And in fact, to be a good scientist, you have to rip out of your guts the experience of the second. The value in objects that demand action. Scientists look at that as biases. And that's fair enough. If your focus is trying to figure out how to use a tool or to figure out what something's made out of, well, you want to make that as easy as you can on yourself. And okay, fine, taking out the more humanistic aspects of our experience is less distracting. But that's not the world that we live. It's great to have a tool, but figuring out why you'd want to make that tool is the second way of looking at life, as a forum of meaning. Meaning demands action. It's as simple as that. If something doesn't have meaning, there is no reason for you to do anything. On a simple level, I don't know if you remember, when you guys were younger, your parents would invite friends over, let's say, and like someone you never met before, and so you were naturally scared of them. Maybe you ran away, maybe you were shy, maybe you didn't want to talk. But what was going on was you were experiencing life as having meaning in that moment. There's someone in front of you. The meaning there is scary man, scary woman. And the action that was demanded of you was protect yourself, go run, hide. On the simplest level, that is what halacha is. It's demanding the should and it's demanding the ought. When we see other people, objects, when we look at ourselves. That's what halacha does. It's value judgments. On the way over here, there was a 40-year-old man sitting behind me. And he was mentally retarded, and he was singing this really beautiful song the whole way. Everyone else in the bus was giving him dirty looks. But he was singing this beautiful song about how he loved his mom and how she plays games with him. And he kept repeating it over and over and over. He's built to see meaning in the world. When you're kids, the way you draw pictures is like the sun would have a happy face and the clouds have a happy face. There's a person in there. And obviously there's no person in these objects, but even as children, we sense there is a meaning in the world around us. So halacha is a science of figuring out how do you properly identify the value and the meaning in every single moment of your life. Because you're doing it already, you might as well be more effective at it. So this guy's singing this beautiful song. Like, he gets it. And it got me thinking, well, why is it he's not chayav in mitzvahs? Why is he not obligated in keeping the Torah? Someone who's retarded that way, because they're not. Because it's not enough that we can sense value and meaning in our lives. But we have to be able to make value judgments. That's the second thing halacha does. It doesn't just outline, everything has meaning, get it straight. But it's giving us a way to, in every moment of our lives, there's always going to be at least 20 different values competing with one another. You need to not suffer from mental retardation to be able to make the value judgments. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Growing up in the shtetl, you had the one rabbi who taught everybody. He taught you, he taught your father, he taught your grandfather. Everyone loved this guy. For the past 50 years, he's been teaching Torah to everybody in the shtetl. So along comes this new rabbi, this younger rabbi, and he's smarter, and he's faster, he's better, he knows more, and he swoops into town and he opens up his own school. So what do? Do you allow this guy to run out the older rabbi out of town? Because he will. He's just a way better teacher. That's a case that demands a value judgment. Because on the one hand, there's gratitude. Like I said, this guy taught everybody Torah for the past 50 years. You grew up with him. You owe him your life in what he's taught you. But there's another value at play here. Wisdom. This other rabbi is going to make everyone's life better. So what do? Halacha is the system that makes us able to make that value judgment. Because halacha l'maisa, gratitude is important, but in this case, having more wisdom is the greater value. You support the new teacher. Bringing people closer to God is more important than showing gratitude to the older teacher. Now, obviously, you don't want to just throw him on the side of the curb. You have other value judgments to make. How do you enable him to maybe get into a different field so he's not going to starve to death? You want the guy to be able to continue to be a part of the community. It's not a simple problem, but halacha is at every step of the way figuring out what has precedence. So that's why that beautiful man sitting next to me is not obligated in mitzvahs, because he can't do that, but you guys can. And I was thinking about that, and I don't know why. It almost made me feel a little guilty. I can do that, and he can't. I had this thought of I better do a good job, because that's exactly what his problem is. So the idea of not taking halacha seriously is the same as not taking seriously what makes me human, to make value judgments that way. And that's what makes life rich. Why would I want to give that up? By getting a sense of that, it's that's what turns the unforgiving judge. Like I said, this map of failure people look at halacha as man, no, you missed it. That's not the point. The point is you get to make value judgments. And you have a whole history of thousands of years of people researching how to make value judgments to lead a better life in every moment. That's the game we're playing. And it's more complicated than that. It's not just making these value judgments. But it's halacha is trying to take into consideration not just you as you are now, but it's demanding you to have a broader view of your life. Who are you going to be tomorrow? Who are you going to be 5 years from now? Who are you going to be 10 years from now? And the mistakes that you might make today might not be such a big deal, but they might hurt the person you're going to be 30 years from now. So halacha says, take that into consideration. You have to take care of not just yourself, but every type of self that you're going to be. And it gets worse, because you have to look at everybody that way. Who your parents are going to be 20 years from now, you have to consider. Who your children are going to be 40 years, 50 years. So that changes the game of life dramatically. It demands certain value judgments that might not feel important today are really going to be important if you don't make them 20 years from now. And so it demands you to look at your whole life, not just now. It's motivation to act. What should you do? And that's a big game to play. And it's hard to sense. It's easier to see the world of things because they're in front of you. I think that's one reason why the symbolism of the Ten Commandments, they're etched on stone, is to bring home that point. It's because values are hard. You can't hold them. There's just something special in every one of us that can feel them, that they're there. So the symbolism is even though that they're not something you can hold, they're more real than stone. I think it's something like that. It kind of makes me chuckle also, is because it's again, the point is not the specific rules, if it was, because if it really was that anyway, you think the Jewish people show up at Har Sinai and they're given the rule, don't steal. It's you need God to tell you that? We have proto-morality. The first bit of my spiel here was trying to sell this idea that maybe a lot of morality you don't need God for. It's already built into you, that God put it into you. It's why would you need halacha to begin with if that's the case? Well, again, because it's not so much the rules, but it's the process you live to achieve those goals. Because you're making value judgments. That's what was given Har Sinai. Not the rules themselves. And I want to present to you guys, generally speaking, there's three different stories you're going to exist in that halacha is going to help you solve or figure out. I don't usually write on the board, but I'm going to write on the board today. Thank you. All right.
The actual pens.
Yeah.
Erasers. They have markers.
Yeah, they have. Okay. This is what we got going on. What is what should be this is the basic story of life. This is morality. What is? You're living in the present moment right now and looking towards the future. What should be? Well, how do you get there? Only through human action. That's why halacha is based, its focus is what do you have to do? It's not, we don't really care that you light the candles per se, but it's a vehicle to achieve what should be, the meaning behind, say, lighting the candles for Shabbos. But this story is the story of morality. Is interacting with the unknown. The first moral story that we have in the Chumash and Bereshis is the story from chaos to what is. God creating the world. And how did God create the world? How did he go from chaos, tohu vavohu, to a moral system? God did two things. These are the rules of the game you need to know. He spoke with intention. He had values and specific goals that are steps in that direction of achieving those values. And they were specific. He spoke with intention. Every single day of creation was a plan that progressed one step to the next. And he spoke the truth. We don't speak the truth. And in fact, every story in Bereshis where things are falling apart, you're going to find that what's going on behind that story is either people are not speaking with intention They are not creating goals for themselves, and they're not taking we'll think of like values as a compass. Like you never really achieve a value. You say you want to be a good dad, let's say, a good mom. I mean, you never get that, certificate. You are officially now a good mother. You never achieve that value. It's more like a direction. You travel north, becoming a good mother. You never get there. But as you travel, as you go through this process, and you go on the way, when you're on the derech, this is really what on the derech means, is you're walking towards a value you will never achieve by creating specific goals that are examples of that value. Good mothers wake up their children on time. Good mothers fix their children lunch. Those are things that you do in order to get a taste of what it is to be a good mother, but you never actually achieve it. So it's like knowing that's pretty important, because like a lot of people oftentimes are just down on themselves, like, I'm not good enough, I'm not a good mother. Well, of course you're not a good mother. No one is. But what you get to do is you get to decide every second, are you going to choose to be that character in the story or not? Are you going to play the game of being a good mother or not? But all you get to do is hit the ball. And then you take your turn. Then someone else, you just take turns doing that over and over and over in different situations. So the whole story of Bereshit is really one example of the next of what happens in life when you don't do those two things. Now, God didn't have to do this, but we definitely do, is to sacrifice. Sacrifice is weird in Torah. Like, no one talks about it. We kind of almost think about it as like, oh, that's a Beis HaMikdash thing. Like, explain that one. It's like, I always thought it was really kind of like, it bothered me for a long time. It's like, how do we have this complex moral system of we care about how you relate to people and yourself, and God is like this sort of ideal we all try to live up to, emulating God. But then what's this whole like killing animals thing? Right. It's weird. But like, this is the most fundamental rule of the game. The idea that in order to get to what should be, in order to get to that future that you want, the only way to get there is to sacrifice now to do it. And if you don't sacrifice something, you never get to what should be. And so we really, in this, God really went out of his way to create a lot of halachas, to like drill it into us. It's like, like some people like, tie a string on their finger to remember, I have to go pick up the milk when I go out to town today. It's like the whole sacrificial system is one big ring you tie around your finger. Don't forget that it's not enough to speak with intention. It's not enough to speak truthfully, but you have to be willing to give up something that's very important to you now in order to achieve what you want in the future. And if you don't do that, you will not get it. Period. It's Cain v'Hevel. That's the story of Cain v'Hevel. Cain wasn't willing to sacrifice. Even though God was breathing down his neck, it's like, man, don't be jealous of your brother. Don't obsess about he's the one who's getting his sacrifices met, like that he's the accepted one. It's like, you can too, but you have to be willing to put in the sacrifice. So what do you sacrifice? Ultimately, you sacrifice yourself now. That version of yourself now I was telling you about. Man, like, if you don't know it's not perfect, guess what? I got a rude awakening for you. We're all imperfect. We got a lot of things to sacrifice. And that's okay. That's just like the way life is. It's an opportunity to make that sacrifice, to be transformative, to be bigger than what we are now. The only way to do that is to figure out, what do I have to give up in order to have something better? That's the purchase that you make. That's the currency you use. I mean, even thinking about telling the truth, something as basic as that, it's like, how much in your life, even if you're saying truthful things, are they really your voice? Or are you just repeating things you heard from other people? And the moment that you start thinking to yourself, you know what, I'm only going to say things that I know are truthful, that I've worked out, that you've joined in Judaism's history of figuring out what truth is. That's all what halacha is this thousands of year old discussion, debate, figuring out what is truthful, finding your voice. Well, as soon as you say, you know what, I'm going to sacrifice lying today, that's hard. But you become someone you respect. You get to have that, but only through sacrifice. So this is one narrative. And this is kind of, I think, the narrative that you guys in your life stage are mostly in. You're going from chaos to order. You're becoming something right now. So that's kind of cool. It's good to know that's the game you're playing. And it's in this game, it's most important to act like God at the time of creation. Create. Know where your value lies. What are the goals you need to accomplish to get there? And don't lie. Not to yourself, especially not to yourself. And it's lying you have to sacrifice to get there. The second story that you might find yourself in is the reverse of this, where things are going fine. You're on the road, and everything goes to pot. All of a sudden, there's chaos. This is the story of the Mabul. This is the story of the Dor HaFlaga, where they weren't doing one of those two things, or three rather, also sacrificing. They weren't willing to do that. So guess what happens? The world ends. That's really it. The world is only supported by those three things. So of course there's going to be chaos in your life. That's good to know. And when you're finding that things aren't the way you want and you're suffering, well, there's three things to assess. You don't have to put so much thought into it. Where are you lying? Where are you not clear in where you're going? And what are you not willing to sacrifice? And if you can have an answer to all three, even better. But the world's gentle enough that even if you come up with an answer to one, you can get yourself out of chaos and back into life where you're not suffering.
Can you repeat the three things you have to assess?
You have to have clear goals that are leading you to a value. You have to join the halachic discussion of what's meaningful in life. You have to be truthful to yourself especially. It's nice if you're truthful to other people, but it's mostly important for yourself. So you don't get lost. And be willing to sacrifice. Sacrifice lying. And that's hard to do because it feels good to lie. Because then you don't have to give anything up. It hurts to give something up. It's not a joke, It's not like, I'm not trying to sell this idea of well, just be better. It's no, that's hard to be better. So you don't just do that. So you have to be on the derech. You have to walk that path with those three things in mind. The last narrative is the hero's journey, which hopefully you guys would choose to be on. The hero's journey is changing the way you look at suffering, changing the way you look at pain. Because this is going to happen. This happens all the time. Every day, at some point, you're going to be in a position where you don't know what to do and you're going to be uncomfortable. It doesn't have to always be dramatic. No one has to always die to live a hero's journey. But there's going to be things that are going to happen that are going to throw you for a loop. Where this isn't working anymore. You have left known territory. You know what is, you know what you want to have happen, you know what you're doing, but for some reason it just ain't working. So you have to be willing to learn from pain and suffering because it's teaching you something. At the very least, it's telling you what doesn't work. At the very least, it's saying whatever this is, you don't scrape the whole plan. You don't chuck the whole rule book. But you have to try and do it differently. You have to walk differently. And try and take as much as you can from what you know your goals and values are. And change how you do them with what you learn in those painful moments. So, if you say something embarrassing when people laugh at you, well, it hurts, and I don't like being laughed at either, but you learn something very important. And that's the hero's journey. It's like it's very similar to the story of Jonah. He had to suffer in the belly of a whale to figure out what he had to do differently to make his life better. And that's what ultimately led him to going to Nineveh and doing what God told him to do. He had to have chaos in his life in order to retranslate what he knew into a new form. It's this rebirth idea. So those are the games that you're playing. And knowing which ones you're playing is the most important thing you could do for yourself. Because if you don't know, then you don't know how to get yourself out of chaos. You don't know how to get yourself out of pain. If you don't know where you're at in the game. Next week, what we're going to get into is the second principle of faith, the unity of Hashem. And what I'm hoping to do next week is expand this idea of this game we're all playing. Because one of the most, knowing the rules, good. Knowing that you're playing a game and you have no choice but to play one of those 3 games, good. But you have to know who you are to do it also. So it's like this, the second principle of believing God is perfectly one is like God is perfectly integrated. If God were a person, it would be that he knew everything about himself. He knew that truth. So it's like he is perfectly actualized. So on our end, in order for ourselves to fulfill the mitzvah halacha b'drachav to emulate God, well, how do we, be one in the way that God is? Knowing who you are, what parts make you up, and having them work together so you can become a more whole person. It's like making the choice between, would you rather be good or would you rather be whole? Like I would say I'd rather be a whole person than be good. Something like that. Of unifying all the parts of yourself so you can play this game well. And that's the take home of that second principle. So we're going to talk about that next week. Cool? Okay. I think me being sick made it more dramatic than it needed to be with the voice.